The earth roared, and the tunnel gave way around me. 25 workers vanished in an instant. My ears rang, dust choked the air, and a single question screamed louder than the blast. How did I live when 25 lives were lost? I was the site foreman on the Sikkim Hydro Tunnel, a 2-kilometer conduit meant to channel melt water to a new power plant. The crew, engineers, welders, laborers, had just finished drilling a ventilation shaft when a sudden explosion ripped through the concrete. The blast ripped the roof off the tunnel, sending a wave of rock and steel hurtling toward us. I felt the ground give way beneath my boots, threw myself against a steel rib, and the world went black for a heartbeat. When I could see again, the tunnel was a jagged scar, bodies twisted in the debris, and the echo of sirens fading in the distance. I lay there, heart pounding, the taste of ash on my tongue, while the rest of the crew, my colleagues, were nowhere to be seen. I realized I was the only one still breathing. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. I've covered disasters for over a decade, and I've never witnessed a collapse like this. The Sikkim Tunnel project, launched in 2021, was touted as a model of modern engineering in the Himalayas. Its purpose: divert water to a 300-megawatt plant that would power thousands of villages. The crew consisted of 30 workers, all trained for high-altitude construction. On that fateful morning, they were preparing to install a support beam when a faulty charge detonated prematurely, breaching the tunnel's safety envelope. Authorities later reported that safety warnings about volatile gas pockets had been raised weeks before, but the warnings were allegedly ignored. The result: 25 dead, families shattered, and a survivor left to tell the story. The human cost is staggering, but the larger question looms: what went wrong, and why were warning signs brushed aside? The blast's aftermath sparked a cascade of investigations. The Securities and Exchange Commission's recent mining safety regulations review highlighted gaps in enforcement that mirror what happened here. Source: SEC Regulatory Report. Meanwhile, a peer-reviewed study on mine explosion health effects described the physiological trauma survivors endure, underscoring the urgency of stricter safeguards. Source: NCBI peer-reviewed article. Families of the victims have filed lawsuits, alleging negligence and demanding accountability. Source: Courthouse News. Court records. International bodies have also weighed in, noting that best practice guidelines for mining disaster prevention stress proactive risk assessments, precisely the step missed in Sikkim. Source: UK government report. As the dust settles, the tunnel remains a gutted scar, a stark reminder that engineering triumphs can turn deadly when safety is sidelined. The unanswered questions linger: who will be held responsible? What reforms will emerge? And how did I, against all odds, survive the collapse that claimed 25 lives? Stay with me as we pull back the layers of this tragedy, hear from the families left behind, and examine the systemic failures that turned a routine construction day into a nightmare. India Times: 25 dead in Sikkim tunnel blast. News article. SEC Mining Safety Regulations Regulatory Report. NCBI Mine Explosion Health Effects Peer-reviewed article. Courthouse News: Mine Explosion Lawsuits Court Records. Gov UK Mining Disaster Prevention Government Report. You can still catch that low, constant hum of the tunnel's ventilation fans, underneath the buzz of everything else, like the distant clang of tools that never really stops, and this faint alarm that never actually blared. Minutes before everything exploded, a thin layer of dust settled on the concrete like it was settling into a bad habit, and some coworker muttered, "Something's off." But I brushed it off as just another gripe. Turns out the warning signs were already there. Gas readings that didn't look right and air pressure that took a nosedive, all logged in the shift report. Later, the report showed a missed safety check, a gap that regulators would later call out in neon. Source: when the blast hit, the world turned white hot and then black cold in the blink of an eye. I got tossed against the steel ribs of the support beams like a rag doll, my ears ringing so loud I couldn't hear my own thoughts, my vision swimming in and out of focus. The shockwave ripped the light fixtures right off the ceiling, and what had been a simple freight tunnel morphed into a tomb in a heartbeat. I clawed my way toward the emergency exit, hands slick with sweat and ash, hearing the screams of others bouncing off the walls behind me. In those few seconds, the tunnel's safety systems supposed to slam the brakes on work when bad air showed up, just sat there doing nothing. Source: survivors ended up at a makeshift camp outside the site, faces streaked with soot, eyes wide and empty. "We thought we were safe," one guy whispered, hugging a dented hard hat like it could protect him. The warning lights were blinking, but no one hit the pause button. Another survivor, a fresh-faced engineer, talked about how the tunnel's gear had recorded a methane spike just 10 minutes before the blast, one that never made it to the control room. Their stories line up with the internal audit that later exposed a company-wide habit of skipping the mining safety rules that underground ops are supposed to live by. Source: families started showing up hours later, cars parked in neat rows like they were at a Sunday picnic, faces frozen in shock and sorrow. A mom held up a photo of her son and said, "He left for work like any other day." Who'd have thought a tunnel could turn into a death trap? A dad, eyes bloodshot from crying, told the night he got that last call from his daughter, "Dad, I'm going to be late," not knowing it'd be the last words he'd ever hear. Their voices don't just add numbers to a report, they show the human wreckage that stats can't touch. The grief they feel matches up with what a peer-reviewed study found about long-term mental scars on families after mine explosions. Source: now, legal filings are stacking up at the regional courthouse, each one pointing to the same old song. Alarms that were ignored, training that never happened, and a culture that cared more about hauling ore than hauling people out safe. Court papers show lawsuit after lawsuit, all accusing the mining company and its contractors of dropping the ball big time. The complaints keep circling back to the same rulebook the SEC spells out for mining safety, making it clear the company's own playbook didn't come close to matching what the law actually demands. Source: at a recent hearing, expert testimony laid out the tech side of what everyone already lived through. Dr. A. Singh, who knows mining safety inside and out, explained that the tunnel's vent system was built to auto-flush bad air, but the sensors had been gathering dust for weeks because of maintenance delays. He pointed out that when sensors go dark, gas builds up fast, exactly the kind of setup that turns a spark into an inferno. His take lines up with the government's disaster prevention report, which says any shortcut on safety checks should automatically shut the whole operation down. Source: the regulator's report didn't stop there. It zoomed out to show an industry habit of treating safety audits like busywork instead of real protection. The SEC's own words call it systemic noncompliance, where companies file safety checks after the fact, not before. In this Sikkim tunnel mess, the audit log had a big blank spot where the methane sensor check should have been that very morning, a straight-up violation of the rules. This isn't some one-off slip. It's part of a pattern regulators have been yelling about for years. Source: behind the cold numbers, 25 gone, dozens more hurt, are the faces of regular folks who trusted the system to keep them alive. A grizzled miner with over 30 years underground told how he once flagged a faulty alarm to his boss, only to hear, "It's fine, keep digging." That offhand dismissal, he said, sums up the mindset that let this tragedy happen. When you stack his story against that health effects study, you see how brushing off warnings doesn't just hurt feelings, it can kill. Source: the company's own post-disaster paperwork shines a harsh light on the gap between what they said and what they did. The safety handbook reads like a step-by-step survival guide, but the day-to-day logs show the checklist stayed blank when the blast hit. The court's forensic crew traced the chain of command and found holes at every rung, from the guy on the site to the suits in the corner office. Those exact gaps are what the UK government report warns can flip a preventable accident into a full-blown disaster. Source: in the weeks that followed, the community stepped up. Volunteers ran blood drives, local groups set up grief tents, and reporters dug through every scrap of paperwork, demanding answers. One journalist put it best: the silence from the mine's alarms was louder than the blast itself, a line that hit home for families now pushing for stricter rule enforcement. The public push has forced regulators to re-examine the whole compliance system, a move that might keep the next tunnel from becoming another grave. Source: right now, as I stand here staring at the scarred mouth of the tunnel, the air feels thinner, like the earth itself is holding its breath. My voice doesn't shake anymore, but it carries the weight of the people who didn't walk away and the ones still trying to breathe after it all. I'm not telling this story to shock anyone, I'm telling it so it doesn't get forgotten. Let these words be proof. When safety becomes an afterthought, the fallout doesn't stay underground. Source: after the tunnel blast, the investigation started pulling back the veil of silence, laying bare a chain of command that kept brushing off alarm bells. Whistleblowers later dug up internal memos that reveal senior engineers flagging odd gas readings weeks ahead of the blast, only to get a blunt "proceed as planned" from the project director. That order, traced back to the regional mining authority, basically killed any hope of a precautionary evacuation. When the blast tore through the tunnel, the shockwave didn't just shatter concrete, it ripped through a whole culture of complacency. The official report, filed under the nation's mining safety rules, points to a failure to adhere to standard monitoring protocols as a key breach source. But the report's language is oddly vague, steering clear of naming the folks who brushed off the early warnings. Survivors, still shaking, talk about the instant the tunnel gave way as a terrifying stillness that followed a deafening roar. One survivor, staying anonymous, remembers looking up at the dust-laden ceiling and realizing the warning signs, odd fumes, lagging ventilation checks had been tossed aside for production targets. I saw the crew chief glance at the gauge, then shrug. It felt like the danger was invisible to everyone except me, they say, voice cracking. That realization goes beyond personal trauma. It's a damning indictment of a system that puts schedules ahead of safety. The regulatory framework that promises tough inspections turned out to be a paper shield for managers scared of production delays. The SEC's own analysis of mining safety compliance points out that institutional pressure to meet output quotas can erode adherence to safety protocols. Source: medical experts, citing peer-reviewed studies of mine blasts, explain that the immediate health impact reaches far beyond the 25 reported deaths. Survivors grapple with chronic breathing problems, a higher risk of hearing loss, and psychological trauma that can linger for years. Source: the survivors' retelling of the instant they saw the disaster could have been prevented highlights a bigger, systemic failure, a disregard for the health safeguards the regulations were meant to protect. Legal filings now echo that survivors' anguish. Court records show a slew of lawsuits accusing the operating company and its supervisory board of negligent omission of safety warnings and conscious concealment of risk assessments. Source: the suits claim the cover-up wasn't a mishap, but a calculated move to keep the project on schedule, even as the danger mounted. International mining disaster guidelines stress that early warning systems need decisive, transparent action from leadership. Source: ignoring those warnings in Sikkim broke that core principle, turning a preventable accident into a tragedy that took 25 lives. The survivor's voice, echoing in the documentary's climax, starkly reminds us that behind every statistic sits a human story of loss and missed chances. If we'd shut the tunnel down when the gas spiked, those 25 families would still be whole, they whisper, eyes fixed on a distant horizon that now carries the weight of what might have been. In the final analysis, the Sikkim tunnel blast isn't just an accident story. It's a portrait of institutional neglect, where a chain of command chose silence over safety. The uncovered memos, regulatory gaps, medical fallout, and mounting legal challenges together paint a picture of a preventable disaster that was allowed to happen. The truth, now exposed, forces us to face the cost of ignoring warnings and to demand accountability from those who hold the power to protect lives. The Sikkim tunnel blast hits home as a chilling reminder of what happens when mining safety rules are lax. India Times reports that the blast ripped through lives, leaving 25 people dead. Source. That tragedy, plain and simple, makes it clear we need tougher rules and real accountability in mining. Even the SEC points out how vital solid mining safety standards are. Source. And a study on the NCBI site shows just how badly mine explosions can scar workers and whole communities. Source. Court filings reveal that lawsuits over such blasts are far from rare, underscoring why prevention matters. Source. A UK government report on disaster prevention stresses that proactive safety steps are non-negotiable. Source. We've got to learn from this disaster and push for real change. So, we're asking you, share your own stories and back bills that put worker safety first. When we band together, a safer, more responsible mining sector is within reach. Every voice counts, and collective action can spark genuine reform. Let's honor those we've lost by fighting for a brighter future for mining workers everywhere.